We're live. Good evening. Welcome to our continuing series on the prayers, the daily prayers, and we're focusing for the last several months on the Shemona Esrei, the prayer that contains 18 benedictions, 18 blessings, beginning with 3 blessings of praise, another 13 of requests, and then the final 3 of expressions of gratitude. We're in the penultimate blessing, the 18th, which is referred to as Modim, or the blessing of Hodah, the blessing of thanksgiving. Within the 3 thanksgiving, this is the one that actually focuses directly and explicitly on the theme of thanksgiving. We covered the first half of this prayer last week. It's a very long prayer. It's the longest in the Amidah, in the Shemona Esrei. And today we will, God willing, try to finish this particular prayer, the second half of the prayer. But just let me rehash one of the themes that we left off on. In the very last piece that we covered last week, we expressed gratitude to God. We said we will thank you and recount your praise for our lives, which are placed in your hand, and for our souls entrusted to you. So we're thanking God essentially for being alive. We're thanking God essentially for being a good custodian of our soul. Now, in this second part, we go on to thank God for things that go beyond our lives. We have to be grateful for life itself, and we have to be grateful for the things that happen in our lives, specifically the things that God does to show us his presence in our lives. We're grateful not just for having all the goodies, but we're grateful that God allows himself to be expressed through the things that he does for us, specifically the things that he does to us, for us, that are interventions in our lives. And that's how we continue. We thank God for your miracles with us daily, and for your wonders and beneficences at all times. So if we go through the sentence again, we see 3 different things. We're thanking God for the miracles, we're thanking him for the wonders, and we're thanking him for the beneficences, or the benefits that we enjoy at all times. So the question is, what is the difference between miracles, wonders, and beneficences? So if we want to find the answer to this, and there could be several different ways of looking at it, but one way is by referring to a prayer that we say on Hanukkah, in which we use 3 expressions as well. And I would like to suggest that those 3 expressions parallel these 3 over here. 2 of the 3 are the same, are identical. The third one, I think, is more or less parallel to it. What are the 3 expressions? We thank God in Hanukkah for the miracles, your wonders, and your deliverances. And the way these 3 are explained by the Rebbe is that miracles refer to things that are overtly supernatural. If you go to the story of Hanukkah, the fact that we won against overwhelming odds, a small band of untrained rebels are able to overpower a powerful superpower at that time, the Syrian Greeks, without any natural basis for their victory. I know people argue, well, guerrilla warfare, sometimes in Afghanistan, the guerrillas routed the Russians, and Americans are still having problems with the Taliban. But we're talking about a far, far inferior force to anything that was present in Afghanistan, and a far more superior force relative to the age that it was in, and the Jews were able to be victorious. That was an overt miracle. And that's what we refer to, and we say we're thanking you for those overt miracles. But then there are wonders. A wonder the Rebbe explains, is not necessarily an overt miracle. It's when you look at something happening and you say, wow, this is unusual. It's not necessarily supernatural. You're not going to say, well, the laws of nature were suspended or something unprecedented happened. But when a lot of different fortuitous events coincide, and when you see things going your way, things are uncannily being in the right place at the right time, meeting the right people, and you say, wow, that was wonderful, that was wondrous, that was unusual, something that elicits a certain sense of awe. And that is not as supernatural and as overtly God's involvement and intervention in our lives, but it's still an intervention. And we still have to express gratitude for that. So it goes without saying that you're going to express gratitude for a miracle. If someone was miraculously saved from a certain death, they will certainly be filled with praise and gratitude. But then you can't just be satisfied with that. You have to also be willing to thank God, and to not just thank God, but in order to thank Him, you have to be aware of these things. You have to be able to notice that something is different. We have to keep our eyes open. One of the things, just parenthetically, the Rebbe, in the last talks that he gave, spoke about how we are living in the very last days of exile. We are on the threshold of the redemption, and all we have to do is open our eyes. And many scholars are trying to understand what the Rebbe meant by opening our eyes. And one interpretation of his words is that we sometimes look around and think that things are just happening because this is part of the natural course of things. This is geopolitical tendencies go in a certain way. No, keep your eyes open to see the reality behind things. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it wasn't, well, of course we expected it. What do you want? The Soviet Union was very corrupt and everything. Look and see the wonders in all of these events. At the time of the Gulf War, the Rebbe pointed out how, well, this is probably a little bit more than wonder, that being the first category of miracles, that 39 Scuds exploded and hit direct hits on apartment buildings that collapsed, and none of the people were killed in those attacks. That was probably in the category of an overt miracle. In fact, I remember someone asked the Rebbe if they should travel to Israel at that time. And the Rebbe says, well, you have a choice. If you will stay here, you'll hear about the miracles that are going to happen. If you go to Israel, you'll see the miracles. So there were definitely great miracles. But even when it's not so overt, just to see how events are coming together in a positive way, that evokes a sense of wonderment, and you have to be grateful for that. You have to open your eyes to see it, and then express gratitude. Those are the wonders. And then we have the beneficences, or in simple English, all the good things that God does to us at all times. You get a raise. Well, you got a raise because you're such a good worker and your boss is such a nice guy. No, you got a raise because God is kind to you. God allocated some kindness and beneficence to you, for which you have to be grateful, not just to your boss for giving you that raise, and you should be grateful to the boss for giving you the raise, or anyone else who is the shliach, the messenger, the channel through which God does good things. But those things are the things that we take for granted most of the time, and we don't stop to think that these come from God. So when anything positive comes your way, even if it's not wondrous, and even if it's certainly not a miracle, you still have to thank God. And that explains also the different usages of daily versus at all times. For your miracles with us daily, miracles don't happen every minute of the day. But if we looked around and we'd see what's going on in the world, we'd see that miracles are daily. Wonders and beneficences, that's all times. Well, the all times, I'm not sure if it's referring to the wonders or just to the beneficences. It could be both, but certainly the benefits that we enjoy every single day. Even a person who has a terrible day, a real difficult day, if they think back, they can point at certain moments of the day that God was kind to them. And for that, they have to be grateful. And then we say evening, morning, and noon. Now, isn't that a contradiction to what we just read? You're supposed to be grateful for the miracles that God does at all times, Now we're saying he only does them in the evening, morning, and noon. That's pretty good, uh, even if it's only evening, morning, and noon. But all times means literally all the time. Well, some translate this that this refers to an earlier prayer. This is like a long run-on sentence. In English, we break it up into many sentences, but in Hebrew, it goes back to an earlier part of the prayer where we say we thank God for all of the things. Evening, morning, and noon really refers to the beginning of the sentence. We thank God in those three times. When do we thank God? When we say our prayers. When do we say our prayers? The evening prayer, the morning prayer, and the afternoon prayer. So it's not that the miracles or the wonders or the beneficences are only those times. They could be all times. But when do we verbally express our gratitude? We don't do that all day. We can't do it all day. We're involved in whatever it is that we have to do to survive and to serve God in other ways other than just thanking Him. But we do thank God. We make a point at least those three times, evening, morning, and noon. Now, uh, other translations I saw do, in fact, understand this to mean that we thank God for the wonders and miracles or beneficences that we enjoy in those three times. That's what we mean by all times. All times means all different segments of time. Our lives are divided into three parts. We have evening, we have morning, and we have afternoon, noon and beyond. Evening, we know what evening is. Evening is a time of darkness. It's a time when things are not going so good. That's a time when you have to be grateful, even though you don't see the good. You know that it's happening. You don't understand God's ways, but behind the scenes, God is orchestrating things that ultimately we have to have the faith and trust that it will be good. And right now, things that are happening behind the scenes are in fact positive. That's when it's night. Nighttime is more difficult to be grateful because you don't see the goodness. You don't see the beneficence. You don't see the miracles. Exile, galut, gola, Hebrew word for exile, is a time that is considered to be a time of night and darkness. And it's hard to be grateful when things are going so poorly. But yet, we have to be grateful even for those things that God does in the time of night. Then we have the morning. The morning is the most refreshing time. We're alive, we're alert, we're just totally alive, and we feel good about ourselves. We're ready to take on the day. That's a time when we certainly are not allowed to take that for granted. We have to express gratitude. And the afternoon is a time when we're so busy, we're so engrossed in our daily activities. And that's the time when we say our afternoon prayer, which is understood to be the most important prayer precisely because it's the hardest prayer to engage in, even though it's not so long, because it means that you have to tear yourself away from whatever else that you're doing and make place for that prayer to pray to God. So when we talk about praising God for the miracles at all times, and it points to these three times, it means to say that whichever state we're in, we could see God's hand. Even when it's night, we see God's hand. We have to be grateful. It's harder to see it, but if we think, and we reflect, and we look, we'll see. We'll open our eyes, we'll see in the dark. Now they have ways of seeing in the dark in modern technology. Well, everything that's in modern technology parallels a spiritual power. We do have the spiritual power to see the light even through the darkness. And then we certainly see miracles in the time of light. But surprisingly, when it's light and there are miracles, you don't notice them as much. Try to light a candle in broad daylight. Take out a flashlight in broad daylight. You don't even notice it. And sometimes you take it for granted. In the afternoon, even though it's still light outside, but you're so preoccupied that it's hard for you to take note of anything. And therefore, we're saying that in all these three periods, God does miracles for us. God intervenes. We just have to open our eyes to see it. Then we go on. You are the beneficent one. You, God, are the beneficent one. For your mercies never cease. The merciful one, for your kindnesses never end. It intermingles kindness and mercy. It starts with you are the beneficent one. In Hebrew, the word is hatov, which means good, beneficent, benevolent, good. And then we say, for your mercies never cease, which is the idea of compassion and mercy. Then we say, the merciful one, refer to God as the merciful one, for your kindnesses never end. So We're calling God the merciful one or the compassionate one, and we're talking about his kindnesses. And it's interesting, I haven't found any commentary that explains why it alternates and seems to incorporate the two, but there's a difference between kindness and compassion. Mercy, compassion are synonymous. What's the difference? Kindness is a trait that involves going, just trying to be good to others, just being blind to their faults, not even caring about who they are, what they've done, whether they deserve it, whether it's even good to give them something. You want to do good for others. That is the natural tendency of a kind person. God has an attribute of kindness. Kindness means that he's good to everyone, even if you're undeserving. So, in a certain sense, that's good for us because we want God to be good for us, even though we may not always be deserving. But kindness has its limits because though you might have someone who is kind, but it can be countered by someone who is cruel. Someone could come along and said, "Why are you so kind to that person? I'm not going to allow it. I'm here to insist that things are done according to law, according to justice and fairness. That person doesn't deserve it." And that person tries to withhold it and intervenes. In other words, kindness, as powerful as it is and as indiscriminate as it is, has an enemy, has an adversary, a legitimate adversary, I would say. Because just like there's a need for kindness, there's a need for rigid discipline, fairness, equity. It's not fair. Why should that person get the benefit and another person who might be more deserving doesn't get it? That's why it's not a good idea to look at people and focus on their goodness, on their blessings, that gives them the evil eye. I'm sure a lot of people heard of the ayin hara, the canine hara. You try to say when someone has something good happening, you say canine hara. There should be no evil eye. What is the meaning of the evil eye? There are different interpretations of it, but one interpretation goes back hundreds of years, is that it's not some magical force that your eye has to harm someone. That interpretation exists, but that's not what we mean over here. When God doles out kindness to people, sometimes God doesn't look. He doesn't care to look at whether you deserve it or not. God is in his mode of kindness. He just gives. Because when you give to the group, even though one individual may not be deserving because he has this flaw, another individual has another flaw, as a group, they are really flawless because the benefits that each one has covers up the faults of the other. So when you are part of a group of people, or even if you're an individual, but you don't focus on the individual, that individual could get away with a lot. But as soon as you show jealousy, when you look at another person, you say, why should that person have that blessing coming to him or her? He or she is not deserving. All of a sudden, you expose that person to divine judgment. God was ignoring his attribute of justice. He was just in the mode of kindness. But because you indicted that person, you accused that person of not being deserving, and you're invoking God's sense of justice. It's not fair, you say. All of a sudden, that person will lose what it is that they have. You won't get it. The person who's jealous doesn't get it, but the other person could lose it. That's one of the terrible things about jealousy, is that jealousy doesn't get you anything. It just harms the other person because it puts the other person in a position where there is greater scrutiny as to whether they deserve it or not. So kindness is great as long as the other fellow called judgment doesn't come along to counter it. People can get benefits from the government and maybe they don't deserve it, but if no one complains, the government will still give it. Someone complains, right away they're going to have to withhold it. Well, the same thing is true in life. Kindness is great when you're the beneficiary of it, but it is possible for it to be countered and you could lose it. Compassion is different. Compassion means I know your faults. I know whether you're deserving or not. It's not a question of, it's not just blind, just giving because I'm a kind person. I can't bear to see someone suffering, so I'm just going to give you, whether you're an addict or not, I'll give you the money, whether you're going to buy drugs with it, who cares? I just can't see you crying or being upset. I want to give you whatever you want. That's kindness. That's unmitigated kindness, which could be destructive in some cases, and it can be countered in other cases. But compassion means I know that you perhaps are undeserving. I know your faults. I know everything about you. But you know what? I'm going to override the judgment against you, and I'm going to find a way of giving it to you in a way that will help you and not harm you. So compassion is much better than kindness, but it's not as powerful as kindness, in the sense that kindness is just unlimited flow of goodness and energy. So we like to have a blend of the two. We want God to be kind to us and compassionate to us. If He's kind, we enjoy infinite goodness, but it could be countered. We can lose it. Compassion, we don't lose, although it might be somewhat more modulated, something more tempered, not as intense and unlimited as the kindness. So perhaps the intermingling of the two is intended to show that we want to benefit from God's kindness and His compassion. Then we say, your mercies never cease, for your kindnesses never end. That unlike human beings who have limited, even though compassion, it doesn't have the same power as kindness, but it's God's compassion. So God's compassion is not limited the way human compassion is. You know what? If someone deserves my compassion and they get themselves into trouble again and again and again, and they keep on repeating their offense, and they keep on getting themselves in the bad situation, a drug addict, an alcoholic, anyone else who is in addiction, how many times could a good, kind person, a compassionate person, keep on saying, well, I'll give you another chance, I'll give you another chance? If you're human, you will get worn out, you will get burnt out, and you will not be able to exhibit the same degree of kindness and compassion. Fortunately for us, God does not have the human weaknesses that He gets bored. He doesn't get bored. He doesn't get tired of forgiving us. We did that when we spoke about God's forgiveness. God's forgiveness, no matter how many times we offend Him, as long as we're sincere, we come back, He'll forgive us again. Humans can't do that. We're not capable of that unless we are so holy, that we are so godly, that we can appropriate God's level of forgiveness, of tolerance. And the same thing is true with His compassion and His kindness. So we're saying, God, your kindness, your compassion is ceaseless. It never ends. And then we say, for we have always put our hope in you. What is that trying to say? It says two things, actually. On one hand, it's saying that we hope. We always have hope in you. But the word for we have always put our hope in you sounds like that's a reason. Why are we worthy of your kindness and your compassion? Because we have never given up hope. The person who gives up hope has actually closed the channel for God's beneficence, for God's kindness and compassion to reach the person. That's why it's always important to never give up hope, because if at a certain point in time God is prepared to give you the thing that you need, you have to be receptive to it. You can't shut the door, because if you shut the door, it's going to be much more difficult to be worthy of and be capable of receiving the kindness and the compassion. So we're saying, why are we able to receive your kindness and compassion? Because we have always put our hope in you. Now, it's interesting, going into the root of the word for hope in Hebrew, the word here is kivinu, we have hoped. The word for hope in Hebrew has two other meanings, related to two other things. It's related to the word mikveh. Mikveh is a ritual bath of water that purifies. And it's also related to the word kav, which is a line. A line. Well, what's the connection between the word hope and a mikveh? There's a biblical verse that says, Mikveh Yisrael Hashem. God is the mikveh of the Jewish people. And there's a dual meaning there. Number one, God is the hope of Israel. Our hope is based on God, and God is also our purifying agent. God purifies us, and the two are connected. Because what is our hope? Our hope is that we are part of God's mikveh. We are submerged in His purifying presence. And that's why we have this hope. Hope, in some cases, is just naivete. If someone says, not based on God, they says, I hope I'm going to win the lottery. I mean, you can hope all you want. It's not going to change anything if your hope is just based on some non-irrational sense. But if it's based on the fact that you're in God's mikveh, so to speak, you're putting your hope and trust in God, you're jumping into and immersing yourself and submerging yourself in God's presence, then you have something to back up that hope. That hope is not just a naive hope. It's one that's based on your connection with God. Also, the word for hope, tikva, also is related to the word kav, which means a line or a channel. And the Kabbalists speak about how God's presence or God's gifts to us comes through different channels. In general, there are three channels, the three primary emotional attributes of God: chesed, kindness; gvura, judgment; tiferes, mercy, the blend between kindness and justice, as we discussed before. So we have always put our lines in you. In other words, our channels. We have created the right channels. How do we create the channels? By us emulating God's channels, by us being kind, by us being judgmental in a positive sense, judging our own behaviors and becoming more disciplined. And by showing compassion, we create the channels through which God generates the energy. Then, after we thank God for all these things, we now praise God. Gratitude, as we discussed so many times, is not just saying thank you. Saying thank you sometimes can be perfunctory, and it really doesn't mean anything. You don't even realize what you're saying when you say thank you. You should still say it, but sometimes it's good to think a little bit what it is that thank you is about. If it's about acknowledging the other, what do you think, if you're talking about two human beings, what do you think the other person wants more than the thank you, the words thank you? He wants the appreciation, that you appreciate what he or she did for you. Well, that's where praise comes in. So even though we divided the Amidah into three parts, the first part was praise, the second part was request, and the third part is gratitude. We have to go back to praise. Gratitude and praise are intertwined, because when you really praise the other person, that shows you're grateful to them. That shows you really appreciate what they've done. So here, after we said clearly the words were modim, we're praising, we're thanking you, we're showing gratitude, we now proceed to the next dimension of gratitude, and that is praise. And I think there's a difference between the praise here and the praise at the beginning of the Amidah. In the beginning of the Amidah, the praise is a way of getting ourselves to become aware of God's greatness, so we're worthy of getting the things that we're going to be asking for. Now we're trying to show our appreciation for it by praising Him. Now, what do we say? And for all these things that we just mentioned before, may your name, our King, be blessed, exalted, and extolled forever and to all eternity. What is all this about? Your name, our King, okay, that's self-explanatory. Be blessed, exalted, and extolled. So the Kabbalists explain that these three expressions refer to the three spiritual worlds. Actually, there are four spiritual worlds. The highest world, the world of Atzilus, is the world of emanation. That's a world of total unity with God. But we want that God's unity the energy that is one with God should be brought down into our world. So it has to go through these different stages. First, it goes down to the stage of being blessed. In Hebrew, the word for blessing also comes from a root that means to take something that is rooted in one place and extend it downwards to another place. It's like taking a plant, it's in the ground, a shoot in the ground, and you extend it outward, and you then bring it down into another part of the earth so that two trees will now grow from that. That is called havracha, which is the same root as the word bracha, which means blessing. So we're asking God to take his energy, his divine energy, and that it should be blessed, meaning it should be extended downward. And then it should be exalted and extolled, means it should reach down to even lower levels, that the lower world should appreciate it and therefore recognize God's special blessing, and that eventually will reach us, so that when we're praising God, we're saying essentially that God's blessing reaches through all the different worlds until it comes down to us. As we mentioned before, that God's energy doesn't come to us directly, it comes through channels. No, God doesn't need channels, of course. God is omnipotent. He can make his energy come to us any way he wants, whether there are channels or not, whether we do anything to deserve it or not. But God wants to have a relationship with us. He doesn't want to just create things without a system. God creates a system so that there is a relationship. There is some way that we could connect to God. It's like two people. One could help the other by giving the other a check. But it's much more humane. It's much more uh, meaningful if the donor, if the benevolent donor develops a relationship with the recipient. So the recipient doesn't just feel, I just got money out of nowhere, but there's some type of relationship. Well, that's what the channels are for. It's for the relationship. And here it talks about the three worlds. That's the relationship God has with us. He goes through different stages from the source down to us. And that's how we show that we really appreciate what God has done, that God is generating his energy, not just in a way that doesn't really show he wants a relationship with us, but he's doing it in a way that does indicate his desire to have a relationship. And then we say, and all the living shall thank you forever, and eternally praise your great name, for you are good. Here we're making it clear that all the living shall thank you forever. Well, obviously, is it the dead people that thank God? It says in the book of Psalms, Lo hamesim yahalleluka, the dead don't praise you. So isn't this self-understood that it's only the living who praise you and thank you forever? But the truth is that when we talk about living over here, we're not just talking about someone who is the absence of being dead. Life is not the absence of death. Death is the absence of life. Life is an intrinsic quality. It's a positive quality. And in order to be deserving of its title life, as opposed to just being the absence of death, life has to have certain qualities. And I think I explained this in an earlier class, that for a human being, life is not just breathing and heartbeat, brain waves, physical movement, having a job, making money, producing children, and all the things that people do in life, playing tennis and golf and everything else that people do, getting degrees. That's not the definition of life. It's all positive things, perhaps, and necessary things, but it's not what defines life. Life is defined for a human being, as opposed to an animal, the ability of a human being to connect to something beyond the human being. Not just connect for selfish reasons. That's sometimes necessary because of self-preservation. You have to do things for others. You get a job, you're working for an employer. You don't really care for the employer or his work, but you need the money, you need the paycheck. So that's not called living, that's called surviving, which is what animals do. What makes the human being is you're able to work for someone and not expect anything in return. Not doing it for the benefits that accrue to you, but doing it because a human being is capable of self-transcendence. I think I explained in the earlier class that life is detected by movement, but everything has its own type of movement. A plant moves in terms of its growth, an animal moves in terms of its mobility. A human being has to move, not the way an animal moves, but by going out of oneself and relating to something beyond oneself. Well, that's what gratitude is. Gratitude is not just living in yourself, but living outside of yourself. And that's why you have to be chayim, you have to be alive. The word chayim, the Rebbe would always point out, is a plural word, because life, to be fully worthy of its title, has to have a connection to someone else's life. And if the only connection is that you're benefiting from the other, then you're not connected to the other, you're connected to yourself. Then it's part of who you are, not going beyond yourself. So true life is a life of gratitude, because gratitude and true life are synonymous. It's going out of yourself, acknowledging the other. The Talmud says there were 4 people who have to offer gratitude. People who go through miracles, their lives were saved. A person who travels, a prisoner who was released from prison where his life was in danger. A person who traverses the sea. A person who goes through terrible illness and recovers. A person who goes through the desert. These are 4 examples of people whose lives are compromised. And those 4 types of people have to bring a special sacrifice in the days of the temple. Nowadays they would say a special blessing of gomel, of giving thanks to God. And the early commentators point out that the word for life in Hebrew, chayim, is an acronym for those 4 categories. The ches stands for chavush, prisoner. The yud stands for yam, the sea. The other yud stands for yisurin, suffering and pain, like in sickness. And the mem stands for midbar, the desert. In another class, we're not going to go into right now, we explained how those 4 represent 4 different psychological states or emotional or spiritual states of a human being, where there's something lacking in their chayim, something's lacking in their self-transcendence. They're not able to get out of themselves. They're suffering from this form of captivity in their own selves. It's a form of illness, a form of suffering and pain, and a desolate area like a desert. But for the purposes of this class, we're talking about how true life is associated with praise. In Kabbalah, we're told that there are 3 attributes that are associated with life. Chachma, the attribute of wisdom. Chesed, the attribute of kindness. And Malchus, the attribute of royalty, of sovereignty. And there are biblical verses that support those 3 things. But these all 3 are associated with life. The Chachma gives life. Why is Chachma associated with life? Because Chachma is the attribute of the intellectual attribute, which is the most receptive attribute to that which is higher. When you have the level of Bina, and this is something we really need more time to go into in more depth, Bina means you're tackling the subject. Chachma means the subject captivates you. You're just, with your mouth wide open, overwhelmed, you're exposed to a higher reality. That's life. When you get into your own understanding of it, you're not as alive as you are when you have the Chachma. Chesed is likewise kindness. You're going out of yourself to give to others. And Malchus, which is royalty, is again a sense of I am there to lead and guide others. Other Hasidic texts talk about how gratitude is forever. It says, all those who are alive shall thank you forever. Why forever? God does things for us continuously. So, of course, we thank him forever because he never stops. But this Hasidic commentary says, no, it's more than that. We thank God for what he did for us 10 years ago, forever. Not just for the new things that he does, but even for the old things, because as we get older and smarter, we appreciate more and more what God did for us. Right now, we have a limited appreciation for the benefits we have. Tomorrow, hopefully, our understanding of the benefit will grow, and we will therefore have to thank Him for the same thing on a deeper level. So gratitude to God is endless, because when a human being does something for us, it's limited. So let's say I said thank you to someone because they lent me money. Okay, that's beautiful, wonderful. Maybe today I'll be more appreciative because I'll realize, you know what, I was really in the dumps and I got that loan, I was able to invest it, and now I'm able to I have a new business and I'm prosperous. That loan saved me. And now I realize it more than I did when I said thank you then. Well, you see how the gratitude grows and changes. But there's a certain limit. At a certain point, it'll stop. I can't say that every favor that everyone does for me is like the end of the world. But when God does something for us, it has infinite depth and meaning, so it continues forever. Another thing, we say, all those who are alive shall thank you. Chiddushei HaRim, one of the great Hasidic masters, says that gratitude cannot be private. That means if I'm grateful to someone for something that they did, that gratitude has to be visible to others. Grateful to God, it has to be infectious. Others have to feel the gratitude in my bones. They can see that I'm a grateful person. That's why gratitude and happiness go together, as we discussed in other classes. A happy person, everyone knows the person is happy. Well, everyone could tell that a person is a grateful person if the person is truly a grateful person, not just going through the motions of gratitude. Rabbi Yehuda ben Yakar, one of the early commentators, says that when this verse, this sentence, and all those who are alive will thank you forever, is not talking about today. Today we don't have that ability to be so grateful. As much as we can say about our need to be grateful and the degrees of gratitude that we can grow with it, the true gratitude will not be expressed until the second stage of the Messianic age, when the dead will come back to life and we will live forever, live eternally. That is when we will really be able to show true gratitude. Only then will we have a total understanding and appreciation for all the things that God did for us. Then we say, Almighty, you are our salvation and help forever, the benevolent God. One commentary says that what he's saying over here is salvation is where God comes in to help us, to save us. The extent to which God saves us is commensurate with the degree to which we recognize that all that we've done was through God's help. There are certain people who take the credit for themselves. It's my ingenuity, my hard work, my good looks, everything else that people will attribute to themselves. That's why I'm successful, because I know how to write a good resume. So that's why I got the job. I got the job because I did well in the interview. I got the job, whatever it is. I have connections. Then when we get into trouble, we say, God, please help me. Please save me. Where were you all along? Where were you when you were successful in everything that you did? God was assisting you all the way. So right now, when you have a crisis, now you want God to save you. The salvation has to follow the recognition that God has always been involved and has always been assisting you. Then we say, Blessed are you, God. Good is your name, and to you it is fitting to offer thanks. This is the end of the prayer. Blessed are you, God. Okay, that's how every prayer ends. Good is your name. Your name is good, but not you. You're not saying you are good. Your name is good, and to you it is fitting to offer thanks. What is going on over here? What is being said over here? Well, first of all, what's being said is Many people are guilty of one extreme or the other. There are people who are not that conscious of God, and they'll be very grateful to people for all the good that they benefit from. Someone does them a favor, they'll be grateful to them. And God doesn't even rate. They don't thank God. They don't think of thanking God in the morning when they wake up or anytime during the day. There are other people, very pious people, at least it seems that way, that they're always thanking God, but they don't care to thank other people because they say, well, who are you? I mean, it's without God, you couldn't have done anything. God gives you the energy to do everything, so I'm grateful to God. Well, both extremes are wrong, obviously, because as the Talmud puts it, that just like when you're drinking the wine being served to you at a party by the waiter, you thank the waiter. The wine doesn't belong to the waiter. The wine belongs to the owner of the whatever place it is that you're drinking in. But nevertheless, you're supposed to thank the waiter. But some people only thank the waiter, and they forget that there's a owner over there who has provided everything. And some people forget to thank the waiter as well. Some people don't thank anyone. But here he's saying that it's, yes, he should be grateful to everyone, to the waiter, but it's something that you cannot forget, that you have to thank the host as well. But let's get a little bit more deeper into this phrase. It says, your name is good, but your gratitude is to him, to God. What does he mean his name is good? We know that God cannot be defined in any way. We cannot use any type of pronoun, any type of descriptive term, rather, to apply to God. Say God is kind, God is good, God is love, God is judge. That's not God. That's his name. Those are names that we use for God. That means God puts himself in a mode of kindness. While he's in the mode of kindness, there's one name for God. When he's in the mode of compassion, there's another name for God. When he's in the mode of being a judge, there's a third name for God. Every one of the attributes, divine attributes, has another name associated with it. So we're saying, yes, your name is good. That means that you have channeled the goodness through the channel of the attribute of kindness, which is your name. But I'm not thanking you because you know how to channel the kindness. I'm thanking you, who you are, beyond your ability to go into a different mode of expression. It's like a king or a government leader of any kind wants to do a favor to a community, and he wants to help them build their bridge. So what is he going to do? He's going to summons the Secretary of Treasury or Commerce or whatever, Labor, and he's going to give them the instructions what to do, what projects to do for that particular area. Or if he wants to put someone on trial who's creating problems, he'll turn to the Attorney General. There's a special channel, a special department, cabinet post through which the president channels his authority to us. But we're not grateful for that only. The gratitude has to go to the source itself, to God himself. So God works through channels, he works through his names, but we should always recognize that God transcends his names. I just want to add something to what we said before about evening, morning, and noon. That God does wonders for us all these different times, or we have to thank him all these different times. That's the most plausible explanation, that the prayers that we say are based on evening, morning, and noon. Actually, King David says that, in the evening, morning, and noon, I praise you. There's a discrepancy. In some places, the prayers are organized as morning, afternoon, evening. The prayers correspond to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Morning service is Abraham. Afternoon service is Isaac. Evening service is Jacob. And yet here, the system is evening, morning, afternoon. So which is it? Which system is true? So the Rebbe explains that both systems are true, obviously. they reflect two different aspects of prayer. One aspect of prayer is where we are connecting to God. The word tefillah, prayer, actually means connection, bonding with God. And like a sacrifice where you get closer to God. It's not sacrifice, it's carbon, getting close to God, communing with God, if you can use that term, becoming one with God. It's a totally spiritual prayer. Is called service of the heart, is where a heart is passionate and in love with God. That's a more spiritual aspect of prayer. Then there's the part of prayer where you're asking God for your needs. You're focusing on your needs and you're saying to God, God, I need this, I need that, please give it to me. So prayer has both of these components. So the Rebbe explains when it comes to the needs of a person, then it goes evening, morning, afternoon, because that's the order of creation. God says, Vayhi Erev, there was evening, Vayhi Boker, there was morning. So the night precedes the day. So when you're dealing with nature, and the natural aspect of prayer, the part of prayer that deals with your needs and focusing on your needs, you follow that sequence, evening, morning, and afternoon. However, the higher level of prayer, the more spiritual level of prayer, where you're connecting to God, there it's the same system they used in the temple. In the temple, the night followed the day. The night was after the day. So that's why it's morning, afternoon, and evening. And then the Rebbe goes a little deeper and he says the part of the temple, the sacrifices, the spiritual aspect of prayer, the day comes first and the night follows it. Because the night that follows the day is higher than the day. Because what does night mean in the context of the temple, of the area of holiness? Night means the aspects of God that are beyond our ability to comprehend them. So when night follows day, that means not only are we connecting to the part of the aspect of God that is relative to us, that we could appreciate, we could integrate into our system. It's light, it's clear. We can even access the inscrutable, the unknowable, the parts of God, the light that is so powerful that we can't even see it. It's such powerful energy. When you're dealing with the physical aspect of prayer, the request for our needs, there night is negative. Night is a time when you don't feel, you don't see, and you climb up from the night, you go to the next level, to the day, and so on. So there are two different systems. In this prayer, where we're thanking God for the miracles, which system do we use? We use the system of the evening, morning, and afternoon. Why is that the primary system? So the Rebbe explains, although he's not referring to this particular phrase, but he's talking to the idea in general, that in terms of what is our focus and goal in life, it's not the spiritual. It's not the spiritual climbing to the point where we can get to see the highest unknowable sources. It's dira b'tachtonim. It's creating the dwelling place down here. So we start the ground down here and trying to bring light into the darkness and working to make the world down here. And that's what we're grateful for. We're grateful, and we express our gratitude for our ability to bring God into this world. Have a good evening. I hope to see you next time. And then the last blessing of the Amidah, God willing.
I think you answered.